Welcome to this YouTube presentation on how dyslexia can affect the student at second level. It is one in a series of 9 webinars, but it is the one I recommend everyone, be they teachers or parents, watch first because it explains the challenges facing the students at this level. My name is Wyn McCormick. Because this one is the opening webinar, the introduction this time is a bit longer. Don't worry, it won't be replicated in the other ones. My background is that I was a guidance counsellor and special needs coordinator in St David's Secondary School in Greystones. But the reason I'm so involved with dyslexia is that my 3 sons, now very mature adults, all have dyslexia and in different ways found second level schools posed a lot of challenges. Back then I felt there was very little help for these students and I became active in trying to improve the supports available. I wrote the book Lost for Words, A Practical Guide to Dyslexia at Second Level, and I co-authored the book Dyslexia in Irish Perspective. Both are now out of print and somewhat out of date. However, in 2013, I co-authored the Fact Sheets on Dyslexia at Second Level to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Dyslexia Association. These are a set of 18 fact sheets, mainly for teachers, but there is one fact sheet for parents and one for students. These have been updated annually since and are circulated to all schools. As well as the fact sheets, I have produced a newsletter twice a year with any developments, new resources and circulated it to all the second level schools. I've been involved in giving courses about dyslexia and how it affects the second level student and talking about strategies that help to parents, to teachers and to students for several decades. In the 10 years since I retired from teaching, I've concentrated my efforts on teacher courses, both whole staff in schools and through the education centres. I wanted the fact sheets used in schools. I've also given a study skills workshop for senior cycle students with dyslexia for many years. The majority of the students attending did not qualify for additional teaching support and were hoping to achieve several higher level subjects. Many of them were taking 5 or 6. They were finding their dyslexia was coming against them and they were struggling to achieve their potential. We looked at the difficulties and then together came up with strategies that might help. Many of these strategies feed into this series of webinars. Throughout the series of webinars, when I give links, they will be on the page below the YouTube video. However, I do realise there comes a time when I have to perhaps cut back, and so I've decided to reduce the activities I'm involved in. From January 2025, I am no longer doing webinars through the education centres and I'm ceasing to produce the newsletters and the fact sheets. I will continue to give in service to whole school staff until September 2025. It is because of this reduction in my activities I had decided to produce these webinars. I have learned so much over the years about resources and strategies from teachers and from the students who attended my courses. I wanted to pass this information on to others. The series of webinars are as follows. There's this one, which is how dyslexia can affect the student. Then how parents can support the student, the dyslexia-friendly school, languages, organisation, memory and note-taking, reading, vocabulary and spelling, self-esteem, the study skills that support the student, writing. I must mention here there will be some overlap between the different webinars. For example, some of the strategies for organisation and memory will come up again in the parents webinar or in the study skills webinar for students. So to begin with, what is dyslexia? It's a neurological condition that makes it difficult to acquire the skills of reading and writing. A key difficulty is phonological awareness, that is matching symbols and sounds. It's genetic, it runs in families. Often when a child is identified, people can look back at the previous generation and wonder if other members of the family have been affected. In my family, it is my 3 lads, my brother, 3 nieces, and I think although I've never been formally identified, I would share some dyslexic characteristics. I can't tell left from right and I mix up numbers. It is lifelong, it doesn't go away. However, students who understand their dyslexia and who have good family and school support, they can achieve exceptionally well. I do think that for a small number, the challenges are just so large that they are overrepresented in early school leaving. It is across every ability level. It won't affect all tasks. Every student has a unique profile of how it affects them. No 2 students are likely to have a similar profile. The incidence is about 10% and it can occur along a continuum. One student's dyslexia may be very severe while another's might be quite mild. It may co-occur with other learning difficulties such as autism spectrum or dyspraxia. Neurodiversity is a concept gaining ground since the 90s and is becoming well established now. I see it as a very positive development in promoting understanding for people with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. It says, people experience and interact with the world in different ways. There is no one right way of thinking or learning and behaving, and maybe in the past, education was geared to one particular way of learning and behaviour. Differences are differences, they're not deficits. People think differently because their brains are wired to think differently. Here are two links. One is to an RTE article on neurodiversity, if you'd like to read up more. And secondly, there's a link to the British Dyslexia Association webinar on neurodiversity for teachers. There's a couple of continuums at play here. Firstly, there is the continuum of ability, which can range from superior to very weak. And then there is the continuum of dyslexia, which can range from severe to mild. The two are not related. One may have superior ability with severe dyslexia or average ability with mild dyslexia. The interventions therefore change for students. Some need all the interventions possible, and perhaps even more, such as additional teaching, language exemptions, reasonable accommodations in exams. Others do not qualify to meet the criteria for these helps, and these are students in mainstream classes relying on the mainstream teacher for support. Dyslexia affects students at second level in different ways than that at primary, but here are some of the ways dyslexia can affect them at second level. It is very unlikely that a student would be affected in all these ways, but perhaps could be affected in a number of ways. So, just to start, I'm going to mention the video, Fat City, How Difficult Can This Be, which is available on YouTube. The link is there. The FAT stands for frustration, anxiety and tension. I use a couple of clips from it whenever I'm giving in-service in schools, as it puts teachers and parents and psychologists into the situation where they experience difficulties similar to those experienced by the child with dyslexia in the classroom. They have to walk in the steps of someone with dyslexia, and I find it can really make people take notice. I showed it once in a parents' course, and the mother rang me specifically the next day to say she had cried the whole way through it. She now knew what it was like for her son. It is very old. You will notice that immediately with the hair and the clothes, and they also use language we wouldn't use now, such as learning disabled. It is 60 minutes long and deals with 12 sections. I would encourage everybody to watch it. So here are some of the ways dyslexia can affect students. Anxiety. The student may come into class anxious about whether they will be asked to read, and they know their reading will be far worse when reading aloud in class, or they could be anxious that they might be asked a question and know that even though they learnt the material in a previous night, they may not be able to retrieve the information or words quickly enough in class. This is what fills their head, and they don't listen to the teacher. Then slower processing. This is covered well in the second section of the Fat City video. It is as though the student has to decipher what the teacher is saying to make sense of it. For the student, it feels as though the class is going very fast and they have to concentrate very hard, and this is tiring. This is quite invisible to the teacher, who thinks that they are communicating at the same speed to all the students. It can mean that the student may get lost if a long list of instructions is given. One of my lads described at the age of 11, when they were doing mental maths in class, by the time the teacher asked the question and I saw it in my head and wrote the answer down, I missed the next question. He had to visualize the information to make sense of the question. Then they may be poorly organized. Their work areas may be a mess and it might be difficult to find things. Their bag and lockers are disorganized. They do not have the correct books or equipment or homework they have done in on the correct time. Their time management may be poor and they may waste time, and therefore homework takes even longer. Unless they have one diary, they can make mistakes about their commitments and double and treble book themselves. They misread their exam timetables and could be late for exams. They feel there is a massive amount to be done. It's like a black cloud over their heads. They just don't know the size of it, but it's overwhelming and it adds to their anxiety. And then note-taking, which is a key part of second level. They may have difficulty making notes in 3 ways. Firstly, from the board. One of the key differences between primary and secondary school teachers is that primary teachers write very legibly on the board, beautifully formed letters. Secondary school teachers are not quite as legible. and that poses difficulties. Here is some cursive writing below. It's fine if you read the words as a whole, but if you're someone who has to read them letter by letter when copying them, you could have problems. For example, the word courses could easily be read as C-O-I-E-R, and so the student may have that difficulty with cursive handwriting. And then due to memory difficulties, they have to look at the board more often and they'll fall behind. As well as that, their own handwriting may be difficult to read. Then, when taking notes from dictation, the teacher may say something and the student doesn't know how to spell it and stops, and there's a gap in the notes. Besides that, their poor handwriting and bad spelling will also come into effect here. Lastly, they may have difficulty if asked to make notes from the textbook. There are two reasons for this. One is their reading. Their reading may be slow. They may have to reread it to make sense of the material. They may lack vocabulary and then jump over big words, which affects comprehension. They may read every word on the page by decoding it, and at the end they still don't know what it's about. They lack comprehension of it. The second difficulty when making keynotes from a textbook is they lack the self-confidence and belief that they'd recognise the key points, and they find it hard to reduce the text then to summarise it. So they write out the textbook again, and they are believing that they are working when they're doing that, but it is of little help to them. It is nearly as long as the text itself, and it's in their poor handwriting. The following is an example of note-taking. Here is the text that the teacher called out. Here is what the student wrote. You can see immediately it would be hard for others to read it, and I think within a week or so the student themselves will not be able to read it. As well as that, it's peppered with spelling mistakes. The next difficulty may be memory and learning, and in particular rote learning. The student has struggled to get information into long-term memory. With rote learning, such as learning scientific equations or quotations in poetry, they may learn it the night before, but by the next day it's mixed up. They learn with patterns and with understanding. With written expression, there are several difficulties. Handwriting may be poor. Sometimes the grip on the pen is such that it creates muscle strain on the arm. Then they are writing and they can't spell a word, so they stop to try to spell it and then maybe decide on an easier alternative. But that makes the writing stilted. At this stage, they have lost their train of thought. Their ideas might be flowing faster than the pen, and they don't realise that they have left words out. They may write far too little. They can look at the question, see something they recognise, panic, and write down all they know, but it doesn't answer the question asked. Their writing may be without much structure. They mightn't know the rules of grammar, punctuation, or paragraphing. Perhaps when these were being taught in school, they were too busy trying to learn to read. With verbal expression, they might find it hard to retrieve information or names they know in time in class, although the information is in their head. The slower processing, which I've mentioned above, and the slower retrieval of answers can make presentations and interviews challenging. Again, because of memory difficulties, they might find it hard to remember sequences such as the alphabet, making looking things up in a dictionary difficult, and even the months of the year. So when the teacher says we will have exams in March, the student may not share the same idea of when March is. One of my lads asked me when he was going to 6th year, does August come before October? They may be confused about left and right, as I have been all my life. It makes the learning of new motor skills more time consuming. It needs more repetition for something to become automatic, and this will be relevant in subjects such as PE. And then we come to reading. I've spoken about it earlier in this list, but here's an exercise. This is not the way they see words written, but it gives you the experience of having to decode what's written on the page. It says, this is not the way dyslexics see words, but it gives you the experience of having to slow down and decode the words on the page. It is possible to read it, but it becomes hard work and makes reading much slower and exhausting. Now, already they can be tired due to the pace of the class and how they have to concentrate. And now, reading tasks add to that tiredness. These are spellings I've collected over the years. And again, you can see how hard they work here. Most of us, when we want to write, words come out automatically. We see them in our head. But for some students, they have to go back to their phonics to try to capture the sound of the word. This is intense and it's hard work, and yet the words come out as quite badly spelt. It needs a teacher to slow down to understand what is being written. Have you worked out all of them? Here are the words they were trying to spell. and you can see the relationship there between the word and the phonics. I think it shows how creative and how hard they work. Now, I think I'm going to surprise you. On the students' workshop, as an icebreaker, we would ask them, how does dyslexia affect you? And they'd produce a list, rather like this one above. And then we tell them, you have one vote. Which is the one that causes you the most problems? And in over 90% of the workshops over the years, the same one came to the top of the list. Just take a second and decide which one you think it might be. When I do this on in-service, it's only always a small minority of the teachers there who identify the correct one. And it was memory. Does that surprise you? Some students with dyslexia may have low self-esteem. It is not part of dyslexia, but connected to it, and may result from their experience over many, many years. Luckily, not all students with dyslexia will have low self-esteem. Where it's there, it can be very deep-seated. It may have begun as early as when they were 6 or 7, and they were struggling to achieve something everybody else in class was achieving easily. It may affect motivation, concentration, behaviour, and can be a cause of anxiety. Being identified late adds to the burden. Teachers may have recognised their abilities and then accused them of being lazy or lacking in motivation when they couldn't do tasks. They can feel very stupid sometimes and alone and frustrated. And as the demands increase, as they go through the school system, the difficulties may also increase. They may protect themselves by making self-derogatory statements. I'm no good at maths. That means I don't really need to have to try. They can become defensive. I'm sure teachers are very familiar with a student who puts their arms around the work so nobody can see it. They learn not to volunteer. Why set themselves up for failure? And they can get frustrated easily and little faith in their own judgment. They don't want to make mistakes in front of others and so don't contribute to class discussions. They can panic. It's not only that there's a right and a wrong way of doing things, there just seem to be lots of wrong ways and they just might happen on the right one by accident. Inconsistencies can make it a roller coaster because it can get worse if they're tired or if they're stressed. At one end of the continuum, you have the student who, because of low self-esteem, will give up very easily. But at the extreme other end, I've met students who know they should be able to compete with their peers and want to, so they become perfectionists and they work over and beyond what anyone could expect. I have met first-year students who are doing 4 hours a night of homework at the end of the school day, and that's far too much. I've met a student who spent all their 5th year summer rewriting their notes for 6th year. Low self-esteem can affect motivation and behaviour. It's such hard work with such little reward. They have to work much harder and yet don't achieve. And there can be all the baggage from years of failure at primary school. It can affect behaviour. If the system makes it that they're not going to learn, it's better to divert attention from this. They might prefer to be the class clown rather than the person who can't do something. They may look for escape from the classroom by being put out, or for a small number it might go as far as school refusal. Richard Hogan, a psychotherapist and the author of Home is Where the Start Is. He is also frequently on Brendan O'Connor on Saturday mornings and writes in the Examiner. He writes about his dyslexia. As I write this, there's a little voice that says, don't tell them about the dyslexia, they'll think you're stupid. That's the problem with something as insidious as dyslexia. It makes you guarded, like you've something terrible to hide. The sheer isolation and embarrassment a student can feel when they're not able to learn at the same pace as everybody else. It's a corrosive thing when it's not challenged. It impacts massively on a student's sense of self. On the positive side, I'm going to mention dyslexia and entrepreneurship. On the students' workshop, I had a lovely little video, and in it said that 20% of UK entrepreneurs and 30% of US entrepreneurs have dyslexia. Now, dyslexia is 10% of the population. In fact, I've also a link to a Forbes article here that puts it as high as 35%. And the video asked, why is this the case? Why are people with dyslexia overrepresented with entrepreneurship? And it suggests 2 reasons. The first was that people with dyslexia are problem solvers and they think laterally. They've had to be since they've faced many difficulties and hurdles. And the second was that they had to work so much harder than others because they faced such challenges. And in doing so, they developed grit, determination and perseverance, which pays off. At second level, I've always said that I see the key challenges are access to the content of subjects, communication of your knowledge back, making the right educational choices such as choice of subject and the level you study at, and then continuing development of literacy and numeracy. This is different to primary, where literacy and numeracy would be key. Here is an example of the importance of access to content and communicating what you know. This is a student going into 6th year. He has just been assessed, and it'll be no surprise to you that his spelling was in the 2nd percentile. However, his other abilities were in the 90s and 80s. By 2nd year, we had realised the most effective support we could give him was to ensure access to content and communication of what he knew. No matter what we did on spelling, it was having very little effect. He did 4 higher level subjects in the Leaving Cert. Of course, they were not English or history or economics. His strengths were in the sciences and in the technical subjects. He achieved his higher level grades and went on to get a level 8 degree in college. His spelling is still problematic, but assistive technology provides a solution to that. With screening and identification, the first step is that someone has a concern. The concern could be a teacher or a parent or even the student themselves. Very often, in my experience, parents may have raised concerns a number of times at primary and have been reassured, and then at a later stage, dyslexia is identified. Here's an example where a teacher raised a concern many years ago with me. The student had written a very funny 4-page essay, but you can see the cross-outs where she has tried to spell a word and can't, and crossed it out and did something simpler, or unusual use of capitals in the middle of words, or bizarre spellings, and then spellings like she spells us, U-S-E, which is very unusual. It was on foot of this essay that we were recommended assessment. Here's an example where the student themselves raised the difficulty, and she wrote about this afterwards. My head ached, the letters churned in my mind, I wanted to scream. As the junior cert approached and more notes were being called out, the more lost I became. Every time a word was spelled to me, it became more jumbled. Once when a teacher was spelling a word, she said double O, and I didn't know what she meant. I had to reread passages to understand them. I got so frustrated. Finally, it dawned on me. Maybe I had a learning difficulty. I couldn't explain, but I have a funny feeling it was dyslexia. I was identified as having it. In that way, I was revealed to know it and know that I wasn't thick. I was angry and confused, and in particular, since I found out 2 weeks before my junior cert. The next step after a concern has been raised is to look at the Department of Education list of indicators. The link is given here. There are 4 lists. One for the age of 5 to 7, then 7 to 12, 12 plus, an adult. No one will have all the indicators. Here's an extract from the list of indicators, age 12. All right, still reading slowly without fluency, many inaccuracies, misreads words or information, has serious spelling difficulties, slow, disfluent or illegible handwriting, an inadequate store of knowledge due to lack of reading experience, better oral skills than written skills, difficulty planning, sequencing and organizing text, difficulty with written syntax or punctuation, difficulty skimming or scanning or proofreading written texts, trouble summarizing or outlining. It goes on and on. Standardized testing could be the next step. Often the CAT is used at entrance and the DATS is often used in transition year where students are making up their mind about their subjects for 5th year. Sometimes there can be such variation in the scores it can raise concerns. Most student scores will come within a band with some variation, but for some students with dyslexia there can be pronounced peaks and valleys. I sometimes have heard them described as the Himalayas. Here's an example from the DATS where there are 8 tests, and in this profile the 4 verbal scores from the verbal reasoning, the spelling, the grammar and clerical speed are way down and the others are much stronger. If a concern has been expressed and the student has some indicators and the standardized test shows grounds for concern, the next step might be the use of a screening test such as LAS or the dyslexia screening test. Such a test might confirm there are grounds to believe that dyslexia is present. Even if an assessment is not in place, the school could put into place supports at that stage. For a definitive identification of dyslexia, it is the psychoeducational assessment by an educational psychologist. These can be difficult to access. NEPS provides a limited amount of assessments to schools. There are waiting lists for private assessments. In recent years, there's been a new development in that there's a specialised postgraduate course in dyslexia in DCU. The teachers coming from this course can assess for dyslexia. Very often, if a psychoeducational assessment is done, it includes a test of cognitive ability, and this is often the WISC-5, which has 5 key areas along with subtests. Here are the scores of a girl I saw some years ago. Maria is not her name. The scores are percentile scores. With percentile scores, 50 is the average score. Scores above 50 are above average, and correspondingly, those below 50 are below average. Her profile shows great strengths and weaknesses. Often students with dyslexia would have a weakness in either working memory and processing, and she is unfortunate in that she has a weakness in both. When the student and those who are supporting her understand such a profile, they can use the strengths in the profile to help overcome the weaknesses. Besides the other webinars in this series, here's where you could go for further information. The Dyslexia Association of Ireland have extensive resources available on their main website and on the Dyslexia Hub and the Adult Dyslexia Hub. Also, they've put their webinars up on YouTube, and these include webinars on assistive technology and the transition to secondary and 6 study skills webinars. The fact sheets on dyslexia at second level are also available on their website, and the link is given. As this is the key webinar in the series, it seems to be the place to give heartfelt thanks to the many people who have helped me over so many years. So many thanks to those listed below. The wonderful committed teachers I met in my journeys, and in particular in the last 10 years. So many have shared ideas and strategies and resources, and then generously gave me permission to pass them on in the newsletters and in the fact sheets. The many students who talked openly about their dyslexia, the travails they faced, and gave me suggestions and challenges about strategies to help. The schools all over the country, from the Beara Peninsula in Kerry to Carndonagh, who invited me in to talk to their staff, and the teacher education centres who opened a new door for me during COVID when they asked me to talk to teachers through Zoom. My DAI friends, Mary Ball and Anne Hughes, who co-authored the Dyslexia and Irish Perspective with me, and who made it such an enjoyable journey. Mary also co-authored the fact sheets. My friend Deirdre McElroy, who joined with me in giving courses over the years. We had great experiences together, and I learned a lot from her expertise. My friends Carber O'Keefe and Siobhan, as well as all the staff I worked with in St. David's and Greystones, who always gave me great support and help. My 3 sons, Robin, Simon and Ted, all of whom have dyslexia, each in their own different ways. I have learned so much from their experiences and the hard work and determination it took them to keep going in a system that did not fully understand them. My 2 husbands, Tom and Donal, who have given me invaluable and essential support through all these years. Tom originally gave me the confidence and backing to take on the brave step of publishing my first book, Lost for Words, A Practical Guide to Dyslexia at Secondary. Donal has been a constant support and a font of invaluable information. And just to finish up, I hope that you will find these webinars to be helpful.